is Jessica Turner, and I currently live in Washington, D.C. I've been here for about 3.5 years. I moved to the D.C. area in order to get a PhD in education, and the focus of my work was girls and women's empowerment. I work with the Baha'i Chair for World Peace at the University of Maryland as a writer, and I also teach English as a second language to adults in a community college in Maryland. I was born in 1976 in Minnesota. In Minnesota, when I was little, it was just my mom and I kind of thought that she was a superhero. Whenever we would go out to like the grocery store or Target, we would meet people that she knew. So I basically thought she was famous. And they would all tell me what an amazing mom I had, which was quite true. And then when I was 10, my mom remarried. She and my stepdad had 2 daughters. So I have sisters that are 10 and 14 years younger than I am, which was an amazing experience. It was nice to not be kind of mostly an only child. And I also had a lot of experience raising babies. So I had a very close relationship with my sisters as a result, which was very important to me. When I was little, I loved to take dance classes. And then my friends and I would make up our own dances and make our parents watch them. I liked school and did pretty well in it. So I had the chance to be in a gifted and talented program, which kind of meant that I got to do some cool things that unfortunately not everyone got to do. When I was 12, we moved to New Jersey, which was very, very different than Minnesota, culturally, for sure. When I was young, in Minnesota again, we went to a Catholic church that was really progressive. It's about gender equality and social justice and peace, and the music is amazing and it's very diverse. And I always felt at home there, and I still do, I feel at home there. When we moved to New Jersey, we started going to the local Catholic church, which was very traditional and quite different than what I was used to. But I got very involved in the church youth group and kind of found a very comfortable place where I felt a sense of belonging and like I could contribute. A huge change that happened when we moved to New Jersey was that my mom stopped working and started raising us all full-time, which fundamentally changed everything for me. I think having her presence in my life at a pivotal point, because I was 12 years old, right? I was a junior youth, and having her like full-time attention on me redirected, I think, some of my choices in really important points, or protected me from maybe making some decisions that wouldn't have been so good for me. But it was hard for me at first to adjust to the idea of her not working, because that had always been a source of pride for me. You know, that my mom was like a working mom, and she worked really hard and she was very successful. And now, you know, in my head, at kind of in an immature way as a 12-year-old, I was like, you're a housewife. And I didn't understand the honor that that role has, or the importance that that role is in the world. So it was a bit of an adjustment. The AIDS epidemic was breaking out kind of in a much worse way. It was the mid-90s. So we convinced the principal to let us cancel school for the day and do a series of AIDS prevention activities for all 1,000 students, and like got the speakers and organized the schedule, and, you know, convinced National Honor Society to sponsor it. You know, and I've always been interested in making a difference in the world, and that was one of my like early experiences getting to do it. I remember when I graduated high school, I slept for like 3 days straight afterwards, and I woke up and I was like, I've been tired for 4 years. So like, I just did way too many things. I applied to many colleges, got into a few, and decided to attend Duke University, So I went down to North Carolina. I scanned all of the all of the departments in the course book that I might be interested in. I came up with 2, and I took introductory courses in each of them my first semester and decided to study cultural anthropology. I had a friend, Alex, who was also Catholic, and we would go to Mass together on Sundays. But it was a very cold and kind of formal Mass. I started looking at other Christian organizations on campus for students and decided to go to a retreat with one Christian organization. And it wasn't for me. It ended up being much more fundamentalist than I was used to. And so they were having conversations about how it's hard to be friends with people who are not Christian because they're going to hell, which didn't work for me at all. That idea that, there's only one dispensation gets saved. I stopped going to church, actually, and I didn't really find another spiritual home. I started working right out of college at an organization called ROCA. They work with young people most in harm's way, who are street involved and court involved and gang involved, or young parents who are struggling. And while I was there, the leadership at ROCA started getting involved in restorative justice. So we all as staff got trained in peacemaking circles. And prior to that, I had been kind of a little bit righteous as a social justice activist. Like, I know the right, we're right, you over there are wrong, which I think is a very common dynamic in social justice work. But with peacemaking circles, it's a consultative process. So everyone is equal, everyone has a say, everyone contributes, everyone's responsible. And it's guided by spiritual principles. And I always kind of reflect back that it was like I was suffocating and I didn't know it before this happened, where I was able to bring spiritual principles directly into my working life. And from that moment on, it became completely necessary that they're always there. So I had all of these mysterious health problems. I was 27 years old, and kind of all these things were falling apart, and nobody knew why. And I was being medicated with things that didn't help, and kind of tested for fibromyalgia and lupus and Lyme's disease. And so my mom had asked me if I wanted to see Julie, because she had heard about her from a friend. In that first appointment, Julie mentioned the Baha'i faith to me, which I don't think she normally does, but she had a feeling about it. And I bought her books, and in her books are some of the writing. So then she turned to me and she said, if you listen to your body, you would have perfect health. And I knew that it was true. And I thought about all of the ways that I don't listen to myself, or didn't listen to myself at that time, in order to make other people happy or do what I thought I was supposed to do, and how it was wearing me down internally. I was also involved in a romantic relationship at the time that was pretty unhealthy. Through my work with Julie, decided not to get married, which was an important choice at that point. So I did a one-year master's in education program at Stanford University. So I was living up in the Bay Area. It was like everything switched in my life that year. I went from being, somebody who went to cocktail parties and was engaged and didn't really have a spiritual home, but was a spiritual person, to learning about the Baha'i faith, no longer drinking, and starting a very serious quest to become my authentic self, because I realized that's what was missing. I went to a shaman in Tucson, I did body work, I read books, I went to different churches, I talked to Julia a bunch. I was like on a quest. By the time I was at Stanford, they were giving me injections. So I would inject myself with medication when I got migraines, which was a bit dramatic, but when I started listening to like saying yes when I meant yes, but saying no when I meant no, or wanted to say no, the headaches went away. And I changed my diet, and I changed my social life, and I started just getting back into alignment with who I actually am and what actually works for me as a person. The other thing that was happening for me at the time was that the relationship that I ended had been a very, very long one. It started in college. And so I was also just figuring out who I am as like just me, as a single person. So I started my own program and I called it Girl Space. And it was for middle school girls in the Bay Area. And I ran it as a contractor at a couple of schools after school. But I had like 3 other part-time jobs at the same time in order to make ends meet. And I was exhausted. And then I found a job working full-time at an organization running a girls and women's empowerment program, but it was in New York City. And I had always said that I would never ever live in New York City. But it was the one job that like totally resonated with me. And so I spoke to Julie and other friends and mentors about it. So I let go of needing to live in California and I moved to New York City, which was amazing and super difficult because it is an intense place. When I first read Julie's books, I loved the books. They actually became the conceptual frameworks for my dissertation, for my PhD. So they've played a big role in my intellectual and spiritual life. The quotes talked about God in terms of He. And I wasn't sure how I felt about that either. And so I didn't really pay much attention to them for a couple of years. And then I remember, again, I don't remember where I was, but I remember there was this one day where I read one of the quotes and it resonated deeper within me as truth than anything I had ever read before. And it made me pay attention. And so I started reading them more frequently. And so then I was back in the Chicago area to visit my parents. And Julie and I were going to meet and have tea. And she needed to pick up her daughter at the temple and wanted to know if that would be okay. And I said, actually, I wanted to visit the temple. And so she got excited and we went and we had spent hours at the temple together. So there was a memorial service happening. So the entire Baha'i community was there. And so we met a lot of people and Julie would introduce me as her friend, which was a big deal to me because I was kind of her client and like her, sidekick. But I didn't think of myself as her friend on those equal levels. And so that just touched my heart quite a bit. And everyone was so friendly. And I remember we spent quite a bit of time, walking around and sitting outside and chatting and seeing the pictures. So I looked up the Baha'i community online and found out what they were up to. The next weekend, I went to a devotional gathering at the Baha'i Center in New York City. We're sitting around in this circle, right? And people are reading and saying prayers and I had 2 thoughts, one after the other. The first was, these people are weird. It's like, this is weird. And the second voice, which didn't feel like was my voice, said, these are your people. And it was like a strongly authoritative voice. And I was like, okay, these are my people. We'll let the weirdness go. And I had one of Julie's books with me, and so I read some of the quotes too. And I had heard about study circles. just earlier that week, and there was a group that was meeting upstairs, and so I asked if I could join. And so I sat in on the study circle, chatted everyone's ear off, and felt like, again, this dry, empty well was being filled. Alamash, who was facilitating the Ruhi book, got me in a book one like that next week, which was amazingly efficient. And my Ruhi tutors were an engaged couple that were about to be married, and this was their first act of service together, which was so sweet. Nima, my Ruhi tutor, knew that I was from Minnesota, and so he asked me if it would be fun to meet Baha'is from Minnesota. So he introduced me to Adi Birkland, and I was going to Minnesota the next week or two, soon afterwards, to visit my family. Adib asked me if I would want to meet his parents. And so his parents took me out to dinner. We had a lovely conversation. They were so sweet. And Najla gave me a book, A Love That Cannot Wait, which is about some of the early Baha'i believers, particularly some of the really strong women, actually. Just these little tokens of things that people kind of gave me along the way that connected my heart deeper to the faith. Kind of getting behind this idea of God as the ultimate authority in my life. You know, I've struggled with authority as a person. I think we all do on some level, right? Either with a boss that was terrible, or, you know, dynamics with our parents, or whatever it is. And I, having found my own authentic self-expression and kind of tried to break free from chains of other people's expectations, had a hard time thinking about giving over authority to God and to His laws. And then it occurred to me that all of these laws are for my benefit, for the benefit of the people around me, for our collective spiritual benefit. And that made a big difference. I was praying and meditating one day, and I was contemplating the idea of becoming a Baha'i. I felt this sense that I would be betraying Jesus if I did that, and I wasn't quite sure how to get around it. I happened to have a conversation with a friend about it. She said, what if instead of betraying Jesus, you would be doing Him the greatest honor? And that let go of that barrier for me, because it resonated as true. In the meantime, Nima and Nada, my Ruhi tutors, Nima had this great idea that our service project for Book One should be hosting the Birth of the Bab celebration in New York City for the whole community. And so the night of the program, in the auditorium in the New York City Baha'i Center, and we kept on running back and forth up the stairs, getting things ready. And as I was doing that, at some point, I saw one of the friends who I knew, and he said, it's so funny that you're hosting this because you're not even a Baha'i. And I said, well, actually, I need a declaration card. And he jumped out of his seat and ran upstairs and got one immediately. So myself and Nima and Nada kind of all snuck into the AV booth, and I signed my declaration card there, and then they were crying, and we had this moment. And then later when I was giving my talk, at some point I was like, and you know, I've been a Baha'i for about 15 minutes. And everyone laughed and applauded, and it was very, very sweet. Declaring my faith was like stepping into the ocean, because it's so vast. And there's so much for me to explore and discover. But what's most important, I think, is this deep connection and love that I've developed for Baha'u'llah. It doesn't matter your past. If your heart is searching, the answer will come like a breeze.